The night felt too quiet for a city that almost never rested, streetlights glowing over long empty sidewalks, a thin cold wind pushing scraps of paper in slow wandering circles, and somewhere far away a siren rising and fading like a memory that refused to stay gone. Inside a narrow third-floor apartment, a man named Elric Vane stood without moving beside a small kitchen table, one hand resting on a microscope that looked out of place in an ordinary home, the other holding a photograph already softened and bent from being touched too many times. In that photograph, yellow police tape stretched across a living room filled with broken glass, and near a fallen chair on the floor lay a dark stain that no one who saw it could ever forget. Elric had studied thousands of crime scenes during long years in forensic microscopy, had trained his eyes to notice details smaller than dust, quieter than breath, details that most people never realized existed. But this scene was different, because this one had taken someone he loved. The official report described the death as simple, quick, already understood, a closed case filed away inside a system that moved forward without looking back. Nothing unusual. Nothing hidden. Nothing left to question. Yet the microscope on Elric's table told a different story. And tonight, after months of silence, it was whispering something new. He leaned closer to the lens, breathing slowly, eyes heavy from too many sleepless nights, the distant city fading until only the tiny universe beneath the glass slide remained. Fragments of dust. Strands of fiber. Particles smaller than sand. Silent witnesses that never lied. For a long moment he did not move at all. Then his shoulders tightened almost without sound. Because what he saw should not have existed. Not in that room. Not on that night. Not inside a case everyone believed was finished. A soft knock touched the apartment door, careful and uncertain, as if whoever stood outside was unsure they should be there. Elric stayed still. The knock came again, slightly stronger, carrying quiet urgency. He covered the slide with a folded cloth, hiding the evidence from open air, then crossed the room slowly and opened the door just enough to see into the dim hallway. A woman stood beneath a weak ceiling light, coat pulled close against the cold, eyes focused with the steady patience of someone who had refused to give up. Her name was Tamsin Rowe, a local reporter known for following stories others avoided, for asking questions that lingered long after officials stopped answering. She studied Elric's face in silence, searching for a sign. "You found something," she said softly. Elric hesitated, because saying yes would pull everything back into motion again. And he was so very tired of motion. But silence felt worse. So he stepped aside and allowed her to enter. The apartment carried the smell of old paper and strong coffee, notes arranged across the walls in careful rows, photographs pinned beside maps of the city, thin red threads linking places that once seemed unrelated but now formed a pattern he could almost understand. Tamsin looked around slowly, not judging, only observing the quiet evidence of obsession and grief living in the same space. "You have not stopped working," she said. Elric gave a faint nod. "The evidence was never complete," he replied. "They said it was finished," she answered gently. "They were wrong," he said. The words settled heavily between them. Tamsin stepped closer to the table where the microscope waited beneath its cloth cover. "May I look?" she asked. Elric did not speak, yet after a long pause he lifted the cloth. She leaned down carefully, hands held back, reporter instincts softened by the weight in the room. "What should I see?" she asked. "Glass," he said quietly. She frowned. There was broken glass at the scene. "Yes," Elric answered, voice low and steady, "but not this kind." He adjusted the focus with slow precision shaped by years of careful work. "Notice the edges," he continued. "They are too smooth, almost softened, as if exposed to extreme heat before breaking." Tamsin remained silent, concentrating through the lens. "That could not happen in a normal living room," she whispered. "No," Elric said. "It could not." The air in the apartment felt colder than before. Outside, headlights drifted across the wall as a passing car moved through the street below. Tamsin straightened slowly, her heartbeat beginning to quicken. "If this glass was not from the apartment," she said carefully, "then it came from somewhere else." Elric met her eyes. "Yes. And if it came from somewhere else, someone carried it inside." Neither of them spoke the final thought aloud. Someone had shaped the scene. Someone had wanted the truth to look simple. Tamsin stepped back, her mind already moving through timelines, paperwork, forgotten interviews, mistakes buried in official certainty. "Why did you not bring this to the police?" she asked. Elric's expression changed, not anger, something deeper and more tired. "They stopped listening months ago," he said. Silence returned. On the wall behind him hung another photograph, softer than the others, filled with sunlight instead of shadow. A woman laughing beside a roadside diner sign, summer light caught in her hair, joy preserved in a single unguarded moment. Tamsin looked at it gently. "She would have wanted you to keep going," she said. Elric studied the photograph for a long time before answering. "Yes," he whispered, voice fragile. She believed small truths mattered. The clock ticked quietly, each second louder than the last. Tamsin turned back toward the microscope. "So what happens now?" she asked. Elric did not answer immediately, because the answer frightened him. Finding one hidden detail meant there could be many more. Following them might lead somewhere dangerous. But doing nothing meant accepting a lie. He drew a slow breath. "Now we begin again," he said. The sentence sounded simple. It was not. Outside, clouds drifted across the moon, distant windows glowing with ordinary lives, people unaware that a forgotten case had just taken its first breath again. Tamsin felt the shift too, the quiet moment when memory turns into movement. "Then we need the original files," she said. "They are sealed," Elric replied. "Seals can open," she answered. For the first time in many weeks, something close to a smile touched his face and disappeared. Hope felt unfamiliar, like a language he once knew but had nearly forgotten. Still, it remained. Small. Fragile. Alive. He looked again through the microscope at the tiny shard resting beneath the lens. Such a small object to challenge an entire truth. Yet truth often hides in the smallest places. Tamsin watched him carefully. "What are you truly afraid of?" she asked softly. Elric kept his eyes on the glass. "That the scene did not lie," he said. She frowned slightly. "I do not understand." He lifted his gaze to meet hers. "If the scene did not lie, then someone much closer to us did." The meaning settled slowly in the room. Closer than the investigators. Closer than the reports. Closer than anyone wished to imagine. Tamsin felt a chill move through her chest. Because some truths do more than solve mysteries. Some truths break what remains. The clock continued ticking. The city continued breathing. And far away, thunder rolled quietly across the dark sky, promising a storm still waiting beyond the horizon. Elric placed the cloth back over the microscope, but this time the motion felt different. Not hiding. Preparing. Tamsin walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "One question," she said. He waited. "If we prove the timeline was wrong, what else changes?" Elric answered slowly. "Everything." She nodded once, understanding more than she wished. Then she stepped into the dim hallway, her footsteps fading until silence returned. Elric stood alone again among notes, memories, and the weight of a truth still forming. He looked at the photograph on the wall, the frozen laughter, the summer that would never return. "I am still looking," he whispered. Outside, the first drop of rain touched the pavement below. And across the street, unnoticed by anyone inside the apartment, a dark car remained parked with its engine silent and windows black, facing the third floor without moving. Waiting. Watching. As if someone already knew the past was beginning to change. And was ready to stop it. Who had truly shaped the crime scene that night? And why did the smallest fragment of glass refuse to stay silent? Morning arrived slowly, not with sunlight but with a pale grey glow pressing through the clouds, the kind of light that made the city feel suspended between sleep and memory. Elric had not rested. The microscope still waited on the table, covered yet present, like a quiet voice refusing to fade. Across the room, empty coffee cups formed a small uneven line, evidence of hours measured not by clocks but by thought. When Tamsin returned just after dawn, she carried a thin paper bag from a corner bakery and the sharp cold air followed her inside. "You need food if you plan to fight the truth again today," she said gently. Elric accepted the bag without argument, though hunger felt distant, almost forgotten. They sat across from each other in the narrow kitchen space, the silence between them no longer unfamiliar. Outside, the city began to wake. Buses sighed at intersections. Metal gates lifted from storefronts. A distant radio played somewhere in the street below. Ordinary life continuing without knowledge of the quiet storm forming in a third-floor apartment. Tamsin placed a folder on the table beside the microscope cloth. "I went to the records office before sunrise," she said. Elric looked at the folder but did not touch it. "They told me the files were sealed." "They are," she replied, "but sealed does not always mean unreachable." There was no pride in her voice, only urgency. Inside the folder rested copies, incomplete but real, pages that the system believed no one would read again. Elric opened it slowly, careful as if the paper itself might break. Photographs from the original investigation. Time stamps. Officer notes written in hurried handwriting. Evidence logs marked finished. Finished. The word felt wrong even in silence. He turned each page with steady fingers, though inside his chest something restless had begun to move. Tamsin watched his expression more than the documents. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Not what," he answered quietly. "When?" She understood. Because time had always been the center of the case. The official timeline described a simple evening. Arrival. Argument. Violence. Silence. All within a narrow window that left no room for doubt. Yet the glass beneath Elric's microscope did not belong to that window, which meant the window itself might be false. He stopped turning pages. One photograph held his attention longer than the others. A wide shot of the living room. Furniture overturned. Lamp broken. Curtains half open to the night. At first glance, nothing unusual. But Elric's eyes did not see like other eyes. He leaned closer, studying shadows instead of objects. Tamsin felt the shift. "You found something else," she whispered. "The clock," he said. She looked again at the photo, confused. "The wall clock is blurred," she said. "Maybe movement when the photo was taken." Elric shook his head slowly. "No movement," he murmured. "Wrong time." Her breath caught slightly. The clock in the photograph showed a time nearly 40 minutes earlier than the official report. 40 minutes that did not exist in the story everyone believed. Silence filled the kitchen again, heavier than before. "If the photo is real," Tamsin said carefully, "then the timeline was already broken before the investigation even began." "Yes," Elric replied. And someone allowed that to happen. The thoughts settled between them like falling dust. Because mistakes in small cases could be accidents. But mistakes in something this precise felt different. Intentional. Quiet. Hidden. Tamsin leaned back in her chair, mind racing through people connected to the investigation. Officers. Supervisors. Lab technicians. Witnesses. Each name now carrying a question instead of certainty. "Elric," she said softly, "who signed the final evidence report." He already knew. The name had lived in the back of his thoughts for months, avoided yet never gone. He turned to the last page in the folder and traced the signature with one finger. Not a stranger. Not a distant official. Someone he had trusted once. Someone who had stood beside him at other crime scenes, sharing long nights and quiet coffee and the strange bond formed only by people who spend their lives studying the worst moments of others. Tamsin saw the change in his face before he spoke. "You know this person," she said. "Yes," he answered. The single word carried weight enough for both of them. Outside, sunlight tried to break through the clouds but failed, leaving the day colorless and still. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Elric closed the folder slowly. "For months I thought grief was the heaviest thing I would carry," he said. "And now I am not sure. Because grief was simple compared to betrayal. And betrayal was beginning to appear in quiet, invisible shapes." Tamsin reached for the photograph of the laughing woman on the wall, not touching it, only looking. "She believed in truth," Tamsin said. Elric nodded once. "Then we keep moving," she continued, voice steadier now. "Even if the path leads somewhere neither of us wants to see." He looked at her, surprised by the strength in her calm. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "Because stories like this do not end when the file closes," she said, "and because someone should care when truth is buried." Her answer held no drama, only quiet certainty. Elric felt something shift inside him, small but real. Not hope yet, but direction. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where morning traffic had begun to thicken. People crossing intersections. Car horns sharp and impatient. A delivery truck double-parked beside a diner sign glowing faintly even in daylight. Normal life continuing. Always continuing. Behind him, Tamsin gathered the scattered pages into careful order. "What is the next step?" she asked. "Eliminate doubt," Elric said. "How?" "We return to the scene." The words felt heavier than expected. Because he had avoided that place since the night everything ended. Avoided the street. The building. Even the neighborhood. As if distance could protect memory from pain. Tamsin understood immediately. "You do not have to go alone," she said. He turned from the window. "I know," he replied quietly. A long silence followed, filled with thoughts neither spoke aloud. Then Elric reached for his coat hanging near the door. The movement felt small. But it changed everything. Because once he stepped outside, the past would no longer stay still. Tamsin picked up the folder and followed him into the hallway, the air colder there, the light weaker. The building elevator groaned as it descended, slow and reluctant, like time itself resisting what was coming. Neither of them spoke during the ride down. Some moments do not need words. When the doors opened to the lobby, the city noise rushed in softly through the glass entrance. Elric paused before stepping outside. Just 1 second. But inside that second lived months of avoidance and fear and memory. Tamsin waited beside him without pressure. Finally he pushed the door open. Cold air touched his face, sharp and real. The street smelled like rain and gasoline and morning coffee drifting from the diner on the corner. Life. Unchanged. They began to walk toward the parking lot where his car waited under a thin layer of dust, unused for too long. Halfway there, Elric slowed. Across the street, a dark vehicle sat parked near the curb. Engine silent. Windows tinted. Unfamiliar. Something about it felt wrong, though he could not explain why. Tamsin noticed his hesitation. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "I am not sure," he said. The car did not move. No one stepped out. Yet the feeling remained, subtle but present, like being watched from a distance too far to prove. After a moment, Elric forced himself to keep walking, because fear could not be allowed to lead anymore. They reached his car, doors unlocking with a soft mechanical click that sounded louder than it should. As he started the engine, the dark vehicle remained still in the mirror. Waiting. Observing. Or maybe nothing at all. Elric pulled into traffic, the city opening ahead in long grey streets leading toward a place he had tried to forget. Beside him, Tamsin held the folder tightly in her lap, as if the fragile pages inside were the only map they had. Neither of them knew what they would find when they returned. Only that the past was no longer finished. And somewhere within a broken timeline, the truth was still breathing, waiting for someone brave enough to see it clearly. The drive across the city felt longer than it should have, every traffic light holding them in place a few seconds too long, every passing street carrying pieces of memory Elric had spent months trying not to see. Rain began as a fine mist against the windshield, soft enough to ignore yet steady enough to blur the edges of buildings and signs, turning the familiar streets into something distant and uncertain. Neither of them spoke much. The quiet inside the car was not empty. It was full of thoughts forming without words. Tamsin watched the passing neighborhoods carefully, noting how the city slowly changed from crowded storefronts to older residential blocks where paint peeled from wooden porches and small yards held forgotten bicycles and silent garden chairs. "This area feels different," she said softly. "It used to feel like home," Elric replied. The words surprised even him, because he had not called anything home since the night everything ended. They turned onto a narrower street lined with tall aging trees whose branches leaned over the road like tired arms trying to hold the past in place. At the far end stood the building. 3 stories of faded brick. Windows dark despite the late morning hour. Yellow tape long removed yet somehow still visible in memory. Elric slowed the car until it rolled to a quiet stop along the curb. For a moment he kept both hands on the steering wheel without moving. His breathing shallow. His eyes fixed on the entrance. Tamsin did not rush him. Some doors take time to face. Finally, he turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than noise. Rain tapped gently on the roof, a slow, steady rhythm like a clock counting something unseen. "We can leave if you need," Tamsin said quietly. Elric shook his head. "If I leave again, I may never come back," he answered. They stepped out into the cool, damp air. The smell of wet pavement mixed with something older, the faint scent of dust and wood and forgotten years that clung to buildings like this. Each step toward the entrance felt measured, deliberate, as if the ground itself remembered what had happened. The front door opened with a soft creak that sounded too loud in the empty hallway beyond. Inside, the air was still. No voices. No footsteps. Only the distant hum of pipes behind the walls. Elric paused just inside the doorway, eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through narrow windows. Memories arrived without warning. Flashing red lights outside. Low voices speaking in careful tones. A stretcher passing through this same hallway. He forced himself to keep walking. Up the stairs. Second floor. Then the third. Each step carrying weight. When they reached the apartment door, Elric stopped again. The number plate remained slightly crooked, exactly as it had been before. Time had moved everywhere else. But here, it had waited. Tamsin stood beside him, close enough to offer strength without touching. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. Then he opened the door anyway. The apartment inside was empty now. No furniture. No photographs. No color. Just bare walls and a wide, quiet space where life had once existed. Dust covered the floor in a thin gray layer, broken only by faint marks from investigators months ago. Rainlight filtered through the window, pale and cold. Elric stepped inside slowly, as if afraid the room might disappear if he moved too fast. Tamsin followed, her eyes scanning every corner with careful attention. The silence here felt different from the silence in his own apartment. This silence held memory. Elric stopped near the center of the room. "This is where they found her," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Tamsin felt the words more than she heard them. She did not reply, because nothing she could say would carry enough meaning. Elric looked toward the wall where the clock had once hung. Only a small darker square remained, paint protected from sunlight for years. "The photograph showed the wrong time," he murmured. Tamsin nodded. If the time was wrong, someone changed the story before anyone questioned it. "Yes," he said. They moved slowly through the apartment, searching without fully knowing what they hoped to find. Near the window, Elric crouched and touched the floor lightly. Dust shifted beneath his fingers. Then he noticed something else. A faint line, almost invisible, running along the wood toward the wall. "Tamsin," he said quietly. She came closer. "What is it?" "Drag marks," he answered. Her breath caught. "From the struggle." He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Wrong direction." The marks moved toward the center of the room. Not away from it. As if something had been placed there. Not fallen. Silence closed in again, tighter than before. "If the body was moved," Tamsin whispered, "then the entire scene was arranged." Elric did not respond, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. A sound echoed faintly from the hallway outside. Both of them froze. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Stopping just beyond the open door. Elric stood, heart suddenly loud in his chest. Tamsin's eyes met his. Neither spoke. The footsteps did not continue. They simply waited. After several long seconds, Elric moved toward the doorway and looked out. The hallway was empty. No movement. No sound. Yet the feeling of presence remained. He stepped back inside, closing the door halfway but not fully. "Someone is here," Tamsin whispered. "I know," he said. Rain tapped harder against the window now, wind rising outside, the storm finally arriving. Inside the empty apartment, tension thickened like the air before thunder. Elric forced himself to focus again on the floor marks. "If the scene was staged," he said slowly, "then the real event happened earlier, somewhere else, or in another way entirely." Tamsin felt the weight of that possibility. Then whoever staged it needed time, she said. Yes, Elric replied. And control, she added. His silence confirmed the thought. Only someone close to the investigation. Close to the timeline. Close to him. Another sound came from the hallway. Closer this time. A faint shift of floorboards. Elric turned toward the door again just as a shadow moved across the narrow opening. Not clear. Not fast. But real. Tamsin's pulse raced. We should leave, she whispered. Not yet, Elric said, though uncertainty filled his voice. Because one question still burned stronger than fear. Why stage the scene at all? What truth required that much effort to hide? Thunder rolled across the sky, louder now, shaking the window glass. And in that brief trembling moment, Elric understood something that made the air leave his lungs. The glass fragment under his microscope. The wrong clock time. The moved body. The sealed report signed by someone he trusted. All of it pointed to one impossible direction. Not a stranger. Not an intruder. Not chance. But intention from within the investigation itself. Tamsin saw the realization in his face. Elric, who are you thinking about? She asked softly. He could not answer. Because saying the name would make it real. Another shadow crossed the doorway. This time followed by the faint sound of breathing just beyond the hall. Close enough to hear. Close enough to step inside. The storm outside crashed into full rain. Water striking the windows in sharp, relentless waves. Inside the empty apartment, time seemed to stop. Elric took one slow step toward the door. Then another. Every instinct warning him to turn back. But truth pulling stronger. He reached the doorway and looked into the hall. And this time, someone was standing there. Still. Silent. Watching. A face half hidden in shadow. Familiar enough to make his heart drop into a cold, endless space. The past had not only followed him here. It had been waiting. The hallway felt narrower than before, as if the walls themselves were leaning inward to hear what would happen next. Rain thundered against the distant windows at the end of the corridor, wind pushing cold air through unseen cracks, carrying the scent of the storm into the still building. Elric could not move for a moment. The figure standing in the half-shadow did not step forward. Did not speak. Only watched with a silence that felt older than the building itself. Recognition arrived slowly but completely. Not just a face from memory. A presence from another life. From nights filled with evidence reports and quiet shared exhaustion and the strange trust formed between people who see too much truth. Tamsin felt the change beside her, the way Elric's breathing shifted, the way grief and disbelief mixed into something heavier. You know them, she whispered. Elric's voice came low and unsteady. Yes. The words seemed to echo through the empty apartment behind them. For a long stretch of seconds no one moved. Even the storm outside felt distant compared to the silence in that hallway. Then the figure finally stepped forward into the weak grey light. Not a stranger. Not an unknown threat. Someone who had once stood on the same side of justice. Their expression was calm, almost gentle, which made the moment feel even more unreal. I wondered when you would come back, the visitor said softly. The voice confirmed what Elric already knew. A voice that had delivered careful conclusions in courtrooms. A voice that had once comforted families searching for answers. A voice that had signed the final report declaring the case finished. Tamsin felt a chill run through her arms. Because calm voices often hide the deepest storms. Elric struggled to find words. Why are you here? He asked. A simple question, but filled with months of pain. The visitor looked past him into the empty apartment, eyes tracing the bare walls, the silent floor, the place where truth had been rearranged. Because unfinished things have a way of calling people back, they said. Rain crashed louder outside, thunder following close behind, the sound rolling through the building like distant collapsing stone. Tamsin stepped slightly closer to Elric, not touching him, only sharing the space of the moment. You changed the timeline, she said carefully, her voice steady despite the fear rising inside her. The visitor did not deny it. For a brief instant, sadness crossed their face like a shadow passing over water. Yes, they answered. The honesty landed harder than any lie could have. Elric felt the air leave his chest. "Why?" he whispered. One word. Carrying everything. The visitor closed their eyes briefly, as if measuring how much truth to release. "Because the real story would have destroyed more than one life," they said. Tamsin's mind raced. "Truth is supposed to matter," she replied. "It does," the visitor said quietly, "but sometimes truth is not the only thing at stake." Elric shook his head slowly, disbelief turning into something sharper. "You moved her," he said. A pause. "Yes." "You changed the clock." "Yes." "You sealed the evidence." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes." Each answer felt like a door closing somewhere deep inside him. Tamsin watched both of them, sensing the invisible history moving between their words. "There was no intruder," she said. The visitor looked at her with quiet respect. "No," they replied. The storm roared against the windows, rain now falling in relentless sheets, the world outside blurred into motion and grey. Inside the hallway, truth stood fully exposed at last. Elric's voice trembled. Then what really happened that night? The question seemed to pull the air tighter. For a moment the visitor could not speak. When they finally did, the words came slowly, carefully, like stepping across fragile glass. "It was never meant to become violence," they said. Memory filled the silence that followed. An argument. Emotions rising too fast. One terrible moment that could never be taken back. Tamsin felt tears press behind her eyes, though she had never known the woman who died. Because regret has a sound. And it was in that voice now. "It was an accident," the visitor continued, barely above a whisper. Elric closed his eyes. Grief he had carried for months shifted into something more complicated. More painful in a different way. "Then why hide it?" he asked. "Because accidents do not stay accidents once the system begins asking questions," came the reply. "Because families break. Careers end. And some truths create only suffering without justice." Tamsin shook her head softly. "Or maybe hiding truth only delays the suffering," she said. The visitor looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe," they admitted. Thunder cracked so loudly it seemed to shake the floor beneath them. Time felt suspended between past and present. Elric opened his eyes again, tears visible now but no anger in them. Only exhaustion. "All this time," he said quietly, "I thought I was searching for a stranger." "I know," the visitor replied. "And instead," Elric continued, voice breaking, "I was searching for someone I trusted." No one spoke after that. Because nothing could soften a realization like that. Rain began to slow outside, the storm already moving away, leaving behind only the sound of water dripping from roofs and trees. Tamsin felt the shift first. The moment when tension begins to loosen. When truth, no matter how painful, finally settles into reality. "What happens now?" she asked gently. The visitor looked at Elric. "That choice was always yours," they said. Silence again. But this silence felt different from the others. Not hiding. Not waiting. Ending. Elric looked around the empty apartment one last time. The place where memory had trapped him. The place where truth had finally spoken. He realized something quiet but important. Nothing inside this room could bring the past back. And nothing outside it could change what had already happened. But the future. The future was still unwritten. He took a slow breath. "I spent months chasing the exact moment everything broke," he said softly. "But maybe healing does not live in the past. Maybe it lives in what we choose next." Tamsin felt the meaning of those words settle gently. The visitor's eyes filled with something close to relief and sorrow at the same time. "I am sorry," they whispered. Elric nodded once. "I know," he said. And for the first time since that terrible night, the weight inside his chest eased slightly. Not gone, but lighter. Outside, the clouds began to thin, a faint pale light pushing through the edge of the sky where the storm had passed. Tamsin looked toward the window at the end of the hallway. "Morning again," she murmured. "Yes," Elric said. They stood there together in the quiet after truth. 3 lives changed in ways none of them could undo. But something else was present too. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. but the beginning of understanding. And sometimes, that is where healing starts. After a while, Elric turned toward the stairs. This time his steps felt different. Not pulled backward by memory. Not frozen by grief. Simply moving forward. Tamsin followed beside him, carrying no folder now, no questions left to chase. Behind them, the visitor remained in the hallway, silent, watching them go, a single figure between shadow and light. At the building entrance, Elric paused and stepped outside into the cool air washed clean by rain. The city smelled different after a storm. Sharper. Clearer. Alive. Cars moved along wet streets reflecting the pale sky. People hurried along sidewalks unaware that somewhere nearby, a story had just reached its quiet end. Elric looked upward, breathing deeply, feeling something he had not felt in a long time. Space. Room to continue living. Tamsin stood beside him. "What will you do now?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Keep looking at small truths," he said. "But not only the painful ones." She smiled gently. "That sounds like a beginning." "Yes," he replied. And for the first time, the word felt real. They walked toward the street together, leaving the building and the past behind them, not erased but finally understood. Above the city, clouds slowly parted, and a thin quiet sunlight touched the rooftops, the windows, the long wet road stretching forward into places still unknown. The timeline had changed. The truth had spoken. And life, patient as always, was ready to move again. The days that followed did not arrive with sudden peace or bright music or the feeling of a story neatly finished. Real endings are quieter than that. They move slowly through ordinary hours, through small routines, through moments where memory still appears without warning. For Elric, morning light returned first. Not dramatic. Not symbolic. Just sunlight touching the kitchen table where the microscope still stood waiting. For a long time he simply looked at it from across the room. That instrument had carried his grief, his questions, his refusal to let silence win. Now it carried something different. Understanding. And a quiet permission to rest. He walked toward it slowly and lifted the cloth that had covered the lens for so many nights. Dust had already begun to settle again, soft and almost gentle. He did not feel the same urgency to search. Not because truth no longer mattered, but because truth had finally spoken. And what remained was life. Outside the apartment window, the city moved through its usual rhythm. A delivery truck stopping too long at the curb. Voices drifting upward from the street. Someone laughing somewhere far below. Normal sounds that once felt distant now felt close again. He brewed coffee for the first time in days without letting it grow cold beside forgotten notes. The smell filled the small kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with memory. When a quiet knock came at the door later that morning, he already knew who it would be. Tamsin entered carrying nothing this time. No folders. No urgency. Only the calm presence of someone who had walked through the storm and reached the other side. "You look different," she said gently. "Lighter," he answered after a moment of thought. She nodded as if she had expected that word. They sat by the window with coffee warming their hands, watching people pass on the sidewalk below. For a while they spoke about simple things. Weather. Traffic. A diner reopening on the corner. Conversations that once would have felt meaningless now felt important in a quiet human way. Because ordinary life is not empty. It is where healing hides. After the silence stretched comfortably between them, Tamsin asked the question that had been waiting. What will happen to the case now? Elric considered it carefully. The official story may never change, he said. Some truths live only in the people who carry them. She studied his expression. And are you all right with that? He looked out at the moving city again before answering. I wanted justice, he said softly. But what I needed was truth. And I have that now. Tamsin let the words settle. In her work as a reporter, endings were usually loud. Headlines. Statements. Public closure. But this ending was different. Quiet. Private. Real. Will you keep working? She asked. Yes, Elric replied. But maybe not only on what is broken. She smiled slightly. The world could use more of that. Time continued forward the way it always does, without asking permission, without waiting for anyone to feel ready. Weeks passed. Rain returned and left again. Trees along the street shifted slowly toward another season. The diner sign flickered back to steady light. Elric began visiting the laboratory where he once worked, not as the same person who had left but as someone changed in ways difficult to explain. Colleagues spoke gently at first, unsure what words were safe. He did not offer long explanations. Only quiet presence. Only steady work. Under the microscope, the world of tiny details still existed. Fibers. Fragments. Invisible histories. But now he saw something more inside those silent particles. Not only evidence of harm, but proof that every moment leaves a trace. Even moments of kindness. Even moments of love. One afternoon, while documenting a simple sample from an ordinary case, he realized his hands were no longer shaking. Grief had not disappeared, but it had found a place to rest. Across the city, Tamsin continued her reporting. She wrote many stories in the months that followed. Some important, some quickly forgotten. Yet one story remained unwritten. The story of that apartment. That night. That hidden truth. She kept it private not out of fear, but out of respect for the fragile line between truth and healing. Some stories belong to headlines. Others belong to silence. And knowing the difference is its own kind of wisdom. As summer slowly approached, the city filled with longer evenings and warm air drifting through open windows. One evening, Elric found himself standing outside the roadside diner from the old photograph. The same sign glowing softly. Cars passing in slow lines of light. Laughter spilling through the doorway with the sound of dishes and music. He had avoided this place for a long time. Tonight felt different. Inside, nothing had changed and everything had. The same counter. The same worn stools. The same smell of coffee and fried bread. But grief no longer filled the space beside him. Memory was still there. Yet it no longer hurt in the same sharp way. He sat quietly and ordered coffee. When it arrived, steam rising in soft twisting lines, he felt something simple and unexpected. Peace. Not perfect. Not permanent. But real. Through the window, twilight settled across the street in gentle blue shadows. People moved through their own stories. Carrying joys. Carrying losses. Most of them unseen by anyone else. For the first time, Elric understood something that had remained hidden even after truth was revealed. Life does not ask us to forget. It asks us to continue. Later that night, he walked slowly back toward his apartment, warm air replacing the cold winds of earlier months. Above him, the sky stretched wide and clear, scattered with quiet stars that had always been there even when clouds covered them. He paused beneath a streetlight and looked upward for a long moment. "I'm still here," he whispered softly. Not to the past, not to grief, but to life itself. And in that quiet sentence lived something stronger than closure. Acceptance. Days turned into months the way pages turn without sound. Autumn eventually touched the edges of the trees. Then winter hinted far beyond the horizon. The timeline that once felt broken now felt simply like time again. Moving forward. Always forward. On a calm evening nearly a year after the truth was uncovered, Elric and Tamsin stood together near the river that cut through the heart of the city. Lights reflected across the water in long trembling lines. Wind carried the distant sound of traffic and music and human life continuing in all directions. "Do you ever think about that night?" Tamsin asked quietly. "Yes," he said. "But it no longer feels like the end of the story." She looked at him with gentle understanding. "What does it feel like now?" He watched the flowing water before answering. "Like a chapter that taught me how to see the rest more clearly." The river moved steadily beside them, never holding the same shape for more than a moment. Truth had been like that too, changing everything, yet allowing life to continue. They stood there without speaking for a while, comfortable in shared silence. Finally Tamsin smiled softly. "You know," she said, "most people search their whole lives for meaning after loss." Elric nodded. "I stopped searching for meaning," he replied. I started choosing it. The distinction was small, but powerful. Above them, night settled gently across the city, lights glowing warmer against the dark. Nothing dramatic. Nothing final. Just another evening in a world that keeps moving. And maybe that is the quiet truth beneath every mystery. Not that answers solve everything, but that understanding gives us the courage to keep living anyway.